So I was thinking about an idea of like about when it comes to hand size and how the more cards your opponent has in their hands, the the harder it is to win through attacks. Even if you're swinging with something that's 40k, you know, 40k power. If your opponent has a huge hand size, 10 plus cards, even without a negate or a blocker, they can still out combo, right? They can use a couple super combos and a couple 5Ks and out combo that attack, which is fine if they have it, right? But when they can guarantee they can have it, right, enough to out combo a 40k attacker, for example, and because they have like 30 cards in their hands, then that becomes a problem where it's like, okay, there's very little skill there. It's just you have the advantage through cards. So when it comes to combo power, the more cards you have to use for comboing, the better, right? So that right there creates, an issue. Um, creates a scenario, I should say, not necessarily issue per se, but like a scenario where your opponent's going to have more cards to defend, but still have cards left over to play. You would think that comboing being the last resort, right? Because you should be blocking and negating, right? Which only requires like one card per attack type thing. When you're comboing, sometimes you're in a scenario you have to use two or more cards to just stop one attack, and then there's still a whole bunch of other attacks you gotta deal with, right? Typically, so the fact that somebody can have like a 30 card hand, for example, that makes it really hard to go for game, just because they had that, right? And by the game mechanics, right, by the game state, it's not like you can fix that, right? You're going to have to play a specific strategy that deals with that, right? You're going to have to, like, for example, you see it in this game, because this is one of those decks that draws up to like 30 cards, right? As you can see on the bottom, 4 cards. This looks like a familiar scenario for me. And then my opponent, the person on the top, got like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 cards. You know, they always seem to have twice the amount of cards that you do, which by default just gives them the advantage, defensively at least, right? But it also gives them the advantage offensively because they just gotta get you to the point where you're low on life, get a double strike attack to go through your blocks and negates, right? And then boom, dump their hand in game just because they had a whole bunch of cards. You know, not much skill or many other things involved because there's very little things you can do when it comes to combo power, right? When your opponent combos and they make their attacker like 100k, you know, it'd be hard for you to out combo that, so then the attack's just gonna go through. So that in itself becomes an uninteractable, situation, right? A lot of people like to talk about that, like the idea that they don't like uninteractable, cards and stuff like that, right? Like unisons, tend to be uninteractable on more, often field cards. Shit, even leader cards at times are uninteractable. Just like uninteractable win cons. People want to be able to defend or at least try to stop their opponent from winning with their win con. So the fact that any battle card, leader, unison, or pretty much any card in your deck that can attack automatically becomes a win con, and at times an uninteractable win con when you have a huge hand size. So then I was thinking, like, what if they had a maximum hand size? Some card games do. Magic has it, Yu-Gi-Oh has it, and I can't think of any other card games that has card limits at the moment. But most card games do have a maximum hand size. So imagine if at the end of the turn, after drawing all these cards, during your turn, you have to discard down to 6 cards. So even if a deck draws a lot versus a deck that doesn't draw a lot, at least the deck that draws a lot won't out advantage card advantage, right, hand advantage, their opponent, especially when it comes to the fact that you can defend yourself with a large hand size, much easier than a person with a smaller hand size, and the whole comboing for power, right, for game, right. So those kind of scenarios can be problematic. It just puts it in a position where it's like, well, if you have a lot of cards in your hands, that by default gives you the advantage. It's not because you're playing those cards. It's just because you can combo those cards, which means you can make a weak attack really strong. So that means out of anywhere, it could be a problem. And we're not too surprised when we see that, because think about it, that's the part of the reason why the Bobbity super combo, or BBD, whatever it was called, super combo was a problem. Think about it, it was just a super combo, but it's the fact that it was able to, one or two copies of the card was enough to turn anything into basically unstoppable, right, win con. So anything, you could swing with the leader and use them, and then your opponent wasn't going to be able to out combo. So basically, it turned anything into a UA, right, an unstoppable attacker. Which ideally, that's what a lot of us want. We want the ability to attack with something and our opponent can't stop us, right? If they don't block, if they don't negate, we want the attack to go through. I get it. Obviously, we want the attack to go through. But, like I said, in this scenario, like that you see right here, if our opponent, in this video, the person on the top is at 3 life, the person on the bottom looks like they're at 8 life, right? Which is cool. Keep your life high. And you can see we're already on turn 3, so 3 energy. So defending gets easier at this point in time when you have this much energy. So we're in mid game. So defending is going to be easier, so it's going to be harder to deal damage. And it gets extra hard, like I said, when your opponent has more and more cards. So by default, just because the player at the top has more cards in their hands, like literally twice the amount of cards than the person at the bottom, that already makes it their chances of not dying anytime soon a lot higher than it should be. Considering the fact that they're already at 3 life, they're really close to, losing, and that should be the outcome, right? It should be that they do eventually take the 3 damage and lose. But if you can mitigate that possibility of losing while you're at 3 life, right, because of a huge hand size, not because you have negates and blockers and stuff like that, or super combos and you being strategic, with how you negate and block and out combo, or just take damage, right? No, you just have a huge hand size, right? You have half your deck in your hand, and that's more than enough to do a whole bunch of things, like out combo a whole bunch of attacks and save your negates for later, right? That kind of stuff. And of course, he more likely, I don't see a unison in play, so he's not free playing any unisons at the moment. I mean, any free play counterplays. But if he has a unison, bang, he'll have free counterplays he can play, and then he has a whole bunch of combo power you can play for free. He probably has a free negate, so there's a lot of free stuff going on there. And having a huge hand size like that just makes it too easy. For the person who's currently at low life to stay up, right? The guy at the player at the bottom now is at 6 life. It's only turn 3. I mean, I do like, finally seeing somebody's life down to 3 or less by turn 3. So it's like, yes, that's the way I roll. Get my opponent down to 2 life by turn 2 or 4. I mean, turn 3 or 4. So it's nice to see that. Sorry. But as you can see, the awkward situation of like, yeah, you're at 3 life. You should be close to dying by now. Every attack should be very very lethal. Should be a whole bunch of double strikes swinging in right now. I was just thinking just how interesting it would be if there was, maximum hand size. Would that make the game, a little bit more balanced, a little bit more fair, or whatever you want to call it. Plus, competitively, I'm not saying like casual play, have a maximum hand size. I'm saying as something for competitive play, just like how we have the time rules, right? And we got best of one, this, that, there. I'm like, what if we also incorporated a maximum hand size? Would that make, games a little bit more balanced? That way, certain decks don't just inherently have an advantage over another deck. That way, it boils down to skill, less to just, I have more cards than you. I out advantage you. Like an example of this would be, a Boma deck topped. Part of the deck strategy was out advantaging their opponent, right? Because on the Leader's Awaken side, you kept drawing 2 cards, right? And most decks only get to draw, besides, drawing for your turn, of course, right? Draw 1 card for attacking. Some leaders don't even draw. Some leaders have other every other ways of doing things, right? Like they'll probably burst instead, or they do draw. Like let's say they burst and draw, for example. Okay, they burst and draw, but that's probably the only draw other than the draw for the turn that the person will have. But then they're playing against a deck that's drawing 2 to 3, 4, 5, or 6 cards a turn. It's like, that's a lot of cards. You're drawing out a lot of cards. And that's not something that just anyone can do. Only certain decks can do it. Certain leaders can do it. Right? Certain card combinations that can do it. Now, if there's combinations of cards, like you got to use a couple cards to get that result, to get that ability, then that's understandable. It's like, it's a strategy. You combine cards to get this result, so it's not something that just anyone can do, right, per se. It's something you specifically have to play certain types of, certain cards to get that outcome where you're out advantaging your opponent, because that's part of your strategy, right? Because you put cards together in a deck and play them to get that result, as opposed to just like, okay, my leader just inherently just lets me draw 2 to 3 cards a turn. It's like, that's powerful just by itself, right? Like I said, not every leader does what Soul Striker does, right? Not every leader untaps energy. So a leader that does untap energy every turn, that gives whoever is playing that an advantage that not just that everyone doesn't have, right? Unless you're playing the same leader, you don't have that advantage. So that just inherently gives an advantage. Now, I'm not against advantage. I'm not against, having something that somebody else doesn't have, which is what what advantage is having or doing something that other people don't have. Obviously, I'm not against that. That's the main thing I try to promote to people, is the idea that you need to make sure that, you're playing stuff that other people are not thinking of playing. You're playing some nice spice that gives you an advantage over other people. That's how you're going to get a lot of your W's, is the element of surprise, the fact that you're playing some really good effects that other people didn't think of using. So you can, let's say, create some type of loop or some type of strategy, some type of combo that gives you an advantage in a game. Oh, he's paying 4. He's playing 4. He actually pays 4. Lose your board and lose your life. So turn 4, he finally got his pointer down to 2. I respect that play, brother. It's what I do. I mean, I could do it without the SCR, but that's no here nor there. But I respect that you got him that close. despite the fact that his hand size is huge. But it's ironic that his hand just got big, so that's pretty cool. He was able to get back in the game, play the. So now they're both equal on hand advantage per se, but I don't know what he did to get to these many cards, but okay. Maybe his leader has some cool ability to get him to get a lot of cards or something, or maybe that card, that 17, let him draw some cards or something. Let's see. What was I saying? It just would be interesting, if they incorporate maximum hand size. Just an idea. I'm not saying that I want a maximum hand size per se. It just that it would be interesting. Of an idea, like would that be something that will benefit the game, right? Not necessarily like, hey man, we need maximum hand size. So these decks to be having like ridiculous, hand sizes. Don't be getting on my nerves by having ridiculous hand sizes. It makes it, nearly impossible to, deal the killing blow just because of that. I mean, I like a challenge, so obviously I have strategies and things that I do or are doing to deal with these maximum hand size issues. Like this, part of being a deck builder, right? Or a player in general, is finding solutions to problems. So if I see that my opponent having a 30 card hand size is a problem, then I have to come up with a solution for it, right? But just was thinking, just the idea, like, imagine if there was a maximum hand size of 6 cards, then I will only have to contend and deal with my opponent, the 6 cards in my opponent's hand, especially if I'm, because another thing is, remember, when I attack, on average, my opponent is adding cards to their hands when I attack. So when I deal my opponent damage, especially if I deal my opponent 6 damage by like turn 4, for example, that's 6 cards in their hand plus the 4 cards they probably drew from their leader. That's 10 cards on top of whatever hand they had. So they could have essentially like about 15 cards in their hands by turn 4. 15 cards in hand by turn 4. And that 15 card hand is going to make it very, very hard for me to go for game on turn 4. Just because I was playing. Just because I was dealing a lot of damage. And now I'm at a disadvantage because of my lines of plays. Because I was dealing a lot of damage. Right? So in a way I'm getting punished for doing good at the game. Right? For doing a lot of damage. I'm getting punished in the sense of now the last 2 damage is the hardest, right? And this is part of why I always say the last 2 damage is the hardest, because your opponent's not going to have like a 2 card hand size, by turn 4 or by late game, I should say, by mid to late game, they're going to have a bigger hand size. The hand gets, for turn 1, turn 2 is the best time to do the most amount of damage because their hand size is smaller. And usually they just let you deal your damage because they want to increase their hand size. But that's why the last 4 damage, right, the next 2 after the first 4, requires a little bit of effort because your opponent has a bigger hand size and more energy to work with. The last 2 is the hardest because they have a huge hand size and a whole bunch of energy to utilize it. So it gets very, very hard, especially when your opponent saves like super counts, for example, for late game. So that way it makes it harder for you to, go for game. Just an observation, just something I noticed. But, I do have ways to get around that issue. But just something I wanted to point out since I thought about that on one of my podcasts about the idea, like, man, imagine if they had a maximum hand size, how interesting, or how would it affect the game if that was the case. So that's the idea of this video is, what if they had a maximum hand size in the game? That's the end of the video.